The first crack in my carefully constructed life appeared on a Tuesday, not a dramatic day, not a day marked by storms or omens, just an ordinary afternoon, sunlight filtering through the blinds of my home office as I reviewed case files. I was a man who thrived on order, a defense attorney with a reputation for dismantling lies, a husband of 12 years, a father to a daughter whose laughter still echoed in the halls even after she left for college. Routine was my armor, but armor, I've learned, is only as strong as the secrets it hides. It began with the necklace, a delicate silver chain my wife Clara had worn for years. She claimed it was a gift from her late mother, a sentimental trinket. But when I found it tucked beneath the passenger seat of her car, snapped at the clasp, something cold settled in my chest. Clara hadn't worn it in months. She'd switched to pearls, she said, for a fresh look. Yet there it was, glinting accusingly, a silent witness to a truth I hadn't yet named. I said nothing. Instead, I began to notice the absences, the late nights at her art gallery, the sudden business trips to Chicago, the way her phone buzzed face down on the table. I mapped her movements, cross-referenced calendars, and pieced together a timeline of deceit. Her lover, I discovered, was a sculptor she'd commissioned for a gallery installation. A man who molded clay with hands that had once traced the curve of her spine. I watched them once, through the rain-streaked window of his studio, her head thrown back in laughter, his fingers lingering on her wrist. A tableau of betrayal, performed just for me, but betrayal alone wasn't the knife. It was the lie she whispered 2 nights later, her breath warm against my shoulder. "I'm glad we're us." As if our marriage were a fortress, not a ruin. That's when I decided. Not rage, not confrontation. Those were tools for lesser minds. I would dismantle her world, as she had mine, brick by brick, unseen, until she stood naked in the wreckage. The first step was financial. Over the years, Clara had siphoned funds from our joint account into a shadow account, a nest egg for her eventual escape. She thought I didn't know. But I'd designed the safeguards myself. Back when trust was a currency we both valued, I rerouted the money, funneling it into a shell corporation I'd created years ago for a client, untraceable, airtight. Let her watch her safety net dissolve. Next, her reputation. Clara's gallery was her identity, a shrine to her taste and influence. I began anonymously leaking details of her dealings, the inflated appraisals, the backroom agreements with collectors, the provenance gaps in her prized Renaissance sketches. Whispers turned to rumors, rumors to cancelled exhibitions. She blamed competitors, paranoia tightening her voice. I consoled her, of course, stroked her hair and murmured empty assurances, my fingers itching with the urge to snap her neck. But the true masterpiece was her lover. The sculptor, Emil, had a past, a string of lawsuits buried under non-disclosure agreements. Sexual harassment, intellectual property theft, a studio assistant left with permanent nerve damage. I unearthed them all, anonymized the victims' accounts, and fed them to an investigative journalist hungry for a headline. When the article dropped, Clara's gallery was already teetering. Emil's downfall became her own. Sponsors withdrew. Collectors demanded refunds. She begged me for loans, unaware the money she sought was hers. I declined gently. "We need to be cautious," I said, feigning regret. Her face crumpled, a mask of desperation. Beautiful. By then the cracks were widening, but Clara didn't yet realize the floor beneath her was gone. Revenge, I learned, is not a strike but a slow unraveling. Clara's despair was a drug, each dose more potent than the last. She stopped sleeping, her once impeccable appearance fraying at the edges, smudged mascara, mismatched shoes. She accused me of indifference. "Don't you care?" she hissed one night, clutching a glass of bourbon, the ice long melted. "Of course I care," I lied, turning a page of my book. The Trial, Kafka. Appropriate. Her gallery closed its doors in March. The final blow was a lawsuit from a billionaire collector. alleging fraud. Clara's name became synonymous with scandal. She stopped leaving the house, haunting the rooms like a ghost, her phone buzzing with threats from creditors. I watched her pace, her hands trembling, and felt nothing, but true annihilation required a personal touch. Our daughter, Lila, was home for spring break, a bright-eyed journalism major, her idealism intact. Clara had always been her hero. "Mum's just stressed," Lila said, defending her when I mentioned Clara's erratic behavior. "She'll bounce back." I waited until Lila's last night. Over dinner, I slid a manila envelope across the table. "Your mother left this in her office," I said. "I thought you should have it." Inside, photos of Emile, bank statements tracing Clara's hidden transactions, a timeline of her affair, meticulously annotated. Lila's hands shook as she pieced it together. "Why?" she whispered, tears splattering the pages. "She didn't want you to know," I said softly, "but you deserve the truth." The rift was instant. Lila left without saying goodbye to Clara, her car screeching down the driveway. Clara stared after her, hollow-eyed. "What did you do?" she rasped. I poured myself a drink. "You did this to yourself." Her collapse was spectacular. She stopped eating, started drinking before noon. One night I found her in Lila's room, clutching a childhood teddy bear, muttering about mistakes. I recorded it, every slurred confession, every ragged sob, and archived the files. Insurance. Yet even then I wasn't satisfied. The final piece came to me at 3 a.m., insomnia clawing at my skull. Clara's greatest fear wasn't poverty or shame. It was oblivion, being forgotten. Her art collection, her legacy, had defined her. So I would erase it. I contacted a former client, a forger whose talents I'd once kept out of prison. Together, we crafted duplicates of her most prized paintings, a Sisley landscape, a Modigliani portrait, flawless replicas. The originals I burned in a remote storage unit, the canvases curling to ash. The forgeries hung in their place, waiting to be exposed. When the truth surfaced, and it would, Clara's name would be scrubbed from art history. A footnote of fraud. She wandered the house now, a shadow. I let her marinate in the silence. The end began with a phone call. An art authenticator hired by a suspicious collector had flagged the Modigliani. Carbon dating exposed the forgery. Then the Sisley, then the rest. Reporters swarmed our gate. Clara, gaunt and twitching behind the curtains, refused to speak. "Handle it," she begged, clawing at my sleeve. I obliged. At the press conference I stood alone, my voice heavy with fabricated grief. My wife was deceived, I told the cameras. She trusted the wrong people. A masterstroke, defending her to condemn her. The narrative wrote itself. Clara, the gullible curator, too desperate to see the rot. She watched the broadcast from our bedroom. When I returned, she was gone. I found her in the pool house, a bottle of pills in her hand. Not enough to kill, just enough to scream for help. She hadn't the courage for a real end. I knelt beside her, pried the bottle from her fingers. "Why?" she slurred, her pupils dilated. I said nothing, let her guess. The hospital pumped her stomach. Lila flew home, her anger at Clara now tinged with pity. "She needs help," she told me, tears in her eyes. "She does," I agreed. "We'll get her the best. A private facility, discreet and expensive. Clara's new home. I visited once for the paperwork. She stared at me through glassy eyes, her wrists bandaged. "You," she mumbled. I leaned close, my lips brushing her ear. "You did this," I whispered. "Remember that." Her scream followed me down the hall. Months later, the house is quiet. Lila has cut ties with Clara, her hero complex shattered. The art world has moved on, Clara's name a cautionary tale. And I take morning runs past Emile's shuttered studio, now vandalized and abandoned. Sometimes I smile, But revenge, I've learned, is a banquet best eaten cold. Clara's ruin sustains me, her absence a presence more vivid than her flesh ever was. I keep the recordings, the photos, the ashes of her beloved paintings, tokens of a battle she never knew she was fighting. And when I pour a drink each night, I toast to the silence, to the order I've restored, to the masterpiece of her undoing, signed in invisible ink. Let the world think her a victim. I know the truth.